I like to do a one-time file import to a data extension in Salesforce Marketing Cloud. I want to use a subset of that data to send to. How do I create a filtered data extension to do so? Thanks! That's a great question. Here's what we're going to learn today. We'll first learn how to create a new data extension in Email Studio. Second, we'll do a manual file import from our computers or from an FTP. And third, we'll look into creating a filtered DE of a list or a data extension. Let's take a look.
I'm going to be going over how to create a data extension using a list import directly into the data extension itself, as well as how to subsequently create a filtered data extension off of your original source data. So for example, if you wanted to create a sendable segment that was a subset of an original master list that you were importing, you can actually create a filtered data extension and define specific criteria to create that segment. So you can see over here on the right, I have my source data, and something to note about your data that you're going to be importing into Marketing Cloud is that it is going to need to be a CSV file because Marketing Cloud does not support Excel files. So you're going to want to save it as a comma delimited file. And then before you do any importing, what you're going to need to do is come into Marketing Cloud and create your data extension because you have to have that location that you're going to be depositing your data into before you actually get started with the import. So we're going to come into Email Studio and create a standard data extension. And there are several creation methods. You can create from new, which is what we're going to be doing here. You can create from existing. So this is essentially copying an existing data extension and copying over the structure and fields, or create from template. So like I said, in this case, we're going to create from new, and we're going to call this DA list import. Give it a name and external key. So external key is what Marketing Cloud uses on the back end as an identifier for this specific data extension. I like to name it the same thing as your data extension name, but if you don't assign a value here, Marketing Cloud will assign a string automatically as your external key. A description, you could put whatever here that you would like, and you can determine a location. So if you wanted to put this in a specific location, you could choose that folder within your foldering structure. And then because we are going to want to deploy to this example data extension today, I'm going to say is sendable because Marketing Cloud will not let you deploy to a data extension if it is not marked as sendable. There are several examples of data extensions that would not be considered sendable. So for example, if you had a historical record or something that you were not going to be deploying off of, you could leave that as unchecked, but in this case, we're gonna check that box. And is testable, we're not going to check this today. Essentially, if you wanted to create a data extension for testing purposes to deploy to, you would use this checkbox. But in this case, this is an actual list that we're going to deploy to, so I will leave that as is sendable. Next, we're going to move past data retention policy. This isn't relevant in this case. Essentially, what this does is set a limit, an expiration date for your data. So if you wanted to keep data or certain records for a year and then have them roll off, you could define that here. And then we're going to set up our fields. So each of these fields is going to correspond with a column in our source data. So of course we have email over here, and in general Marketing Cloud does like for you to have these not Marketing Cloud likes you to, but it is simple in certain ways, and I'll go over in a second the field mapping. If your fields are named exactly the same as your spreadsheet, it makes it a little bit easier to import, just because Marketing Cloud can identify exactly which fields from your spreadsheet go to which fields in the data extension. But in this case, what I'm going to do for the sake of demonstration, I'll show you what it looks like when you do have them named differently. So originally these in the spreadsheet were called first and last name, but I'm going to shorten them a little bit to show what that looks like when you're mapping your fields in the import. So then what we're going to do is define a data type for each of your fields. So for email, well, that's going to be an email address data type. And then the rest of these are going to be text fields. And the one thing I will note is that order total. Of course, you'll see in this source data over here that this is actually a number. And if you look through your field types, there are a lot of different things. There's date, Boolean, phone, locale. Decimal and number are, of course, optional options here. But I would really encourage most times the use of this text field because it treats the numbers as a text field, but there are some limitations and restrictions with the number and decimal fields that can cause issues and errors when you're importing if you're not careful. So generally, I like to treat numbers as text. And then we're going to define our length. So for email address, 254 is the default, but for all these other fields, you're going to want to make sure. So for first and last name, I don't know who would have names longer than 50 characters, but it is possible. So if that is something you're worried about, you can change that to 100. Region, that's probably generally pretty short. You can make that probably like 25, I would guess. Previous order total, probably never going to be 50 characters long. We'll also shorten that a little bit. And then B2B, you can see in that column we have either null fields or fields with Y to indicate yes. So really you could, if you knew for a fact that your data was never going to have a value longer than 1, you could set that to be a value of 1. However, if you think that there's ever a chance that it could be spelled out as YES or have another word that indicates a status of some kind, you could set that to be a little bit longer. So in this case, I'll leave it at 10. Then it's going to ask you to define your primary key. So what this is that unique identifier that you're going to be deploying off of. So in this case, that's email because that's your unique value for each individual record in this data extension. And then generally, I like to mark the rest of the fields nullable just because if there is ever a chance that any of these fields could be null, so the way that in this B2B column you have these null fields which indicate that those are not B2B customers. If you did not mark that field as nullable, these fields would not enter into the data extension. It would essentially error those records and they would not become a part of your DE. So generally good practice is mark fields that are not your primary key, which is obviously required to have a record in the data extension, but to mark the rest of them as nullable. So then you're going to define your send relationship. So what this is, without getting too technical, is what value from your data extension relates back to the contact. So in this case, it's going to be email address relates to subscribers on subscriber key. And then we're going to click create. So then you'll click into your data extension that you've just created. You can see all of the details here and all of the fields available over here on the right, and you do have the ability to edit those as well if needed. And then what you'll do is come into the Records tab and click Import. So this is where you'll actually import your data into your data extension. And you have the ability to import either from your computer or from an FTP. In this case, I am going to import from my computer, but just note that you can also import from the FTP. So in this case, I'm going to come into my computer, and you can see I have it saved a couple different file types here, but again, Marketing Cloud does not allow Excel files, so we're going to click this CSV file that I have saved. We're going to say comma delimited because it is a CSV file, which means it is a comma delimited file. And then we are going to choose import type. So there are several options here, and really this is about knowing your data, knowing your use case, and knowing what's best for you. You have the ability to add an update, so add any new records or update changes in any records that may have happened since your last import. Add only, so this would not update records, but it would add new values based on that subscriber key, not new values, new rows of data based on that unique identifier, that subscriber key, which in this case is email. Update only or overwrite. So in this case, we are going to say overwrite because I'll just say for this example, I would hope that every time I import a list, it's my most up-to-date customer list, and I'm going to say that I want to overwrite. And then we're going to skip bad data. So leave that box checked, and then we're going to respect double quotes as text qualifier. I like to always check this because this does allow for, if you do have any values in your data that contain commas, it will respect them as text rather than a delimiter. Configure mapping. So this is what I was referring to earlier when I talked about those header rows and how Marketing Cloud, if they're named the same, it can automatically map those to your data. So in this case, you can see how it has mapped those fields that were named exactly the same, but it doesn't quite know what to do this with these F and L name fields because I did change the name of those. So it doesn't have an exact value to map to from your source data. So what we're going to do in this case is map manually, but I do want to just touch on map by ordinal. What this does is it maps your first column, so column A in your source data, to the first column in your data extension, so email to email, then column B, F name to first name. So in this case, they are in the same order in the data extension as they are in my spreadsheet, but it may not always be that way, so I'm going to go ahead and choose to map manually. So you can see that these ones that are named exactly the same are already mapped over because Marketing Cloud was able to identify the exact value that they map to. But for F and L name, I'm going to go ahead and assign those values so that it knows which columns to map to from my source data. So then I'm going to click next, and I can choose a notification email address. So this will send me an email to let me know when my import's complete, or it'll also let you know if there were any errors and what those were. So then I'll click import, and this should take just a second. I went ahead and paused, but this actually uploaded pretty immediately, so there was not really any need to pause. It was pretty instantaneous that this list uploaded into this data extension. So you can see here in your properties tab that there are 13 records, which correspond to the number of records that we have in our spreadsheet. And then when you click into the records tab, you have the ability to look at these records and your data from your spreadsheet in your data extension. So it's all here now and has been uploaded into this DE. So what I'm going to go over next is how to create a filtered data extension off of this list. So let's say, for example, that this is your master data extension that you've uploaded into Marketing Cloud, your master list, but you want to send a deployment to a specific grouping of these individuals based on a certain attribute. What you have the ability to do is create a filtered data extension based on these values and these attributes. So what you'll want to do is come up here to the top right corner and click filter. And here what you have the ability to do is define rules based on your attributes from your data extension. So these are all the columns in your data extension that you can create rules based off of. So if, for example, I wanted to send to a specific region, I could say region is equal to southeast, because I know that that is the value that determines that region. So it is going to look for that exact value. But you do have several other options in here. You have is not equal to, greater than, less than, exists in, or does not exist in. These are essentially these give you the ability to create delimited strings, so you could actually create multiple values that it's checking for. You have begins with, ends with, contains, does not contain, etc. So all of these rules and conditions allow you to create a filter structure based on the data and the attributes that you have available to you. So let's just say, for the purpose of this example, I want to deploy to all of the customers that I have that are live in the southeast or that live in the northeast. So I could say region is equal to southeast, or region is equal to northeast. So what I would want to do here, because I would not be wanting to look for southeast and northeast, that does not exist in my data set, I'm going to want to change this to an or statement. Let's also say, for the sake of example, that I want to exclude anyone who is a B2B customer. So obviously I have a Y to indicate that individuals are a B2B customer. So I could say B2B is equal to Y. Or because I have also, if I thought that there were going to be cases where that was spelled out, like yes, I could add another or statement. So B2B is equal to Y, or B2B is equal to yes. Or I also have the ability to say, if I know that every single time I'm going to want to, that, you know, the non-B2B customers are always going to be null, I could say B2B is not empty. And that would include any field that has a value. So that would pull in all those records that have a Y marked for B2B. So lots of different options here for filtering. So in this case, we'll say I'll want to send to anyone that is not equal to B2B. So we'll say B2B is not equal to Y. And you can see over here, because I added another condition, it changed my and or definition. So what you're actually going to want to do is come here and create a sub grouping of these and or statements. So again, you'll want it to be southeast or northeast, so you'll want to change this to an or statement. But the rest of this is going to be and, because I want to include anyone who meets this southeast northeast criteria and anyone who is not equal to Y. And then I could also, if I wanted to filter based on the previous order total, I could say I want to filter based on anyone who is, I want to say anyone who is not equal to Y for that B2B customer value. Or I could say, you know what, I also want to exclude customers that have spent over a certain amount. And so I could say is greater than, let's just say 500. So that would allow you to exclude both B2B customers or anyone who has, this would include, so it would actually be the opposite of that. So it would be previous order total is less than or equal to 500. Because that's a group that I want to pull into my data extension. And that's going to be another or statement. So here, for my final filter definition, I am bringing into my new filtered data extension anyone who has a region equal to southeast or anyone who has a region equal to northeast, and anyone who has a B2B value that is not equal to Y, or anyone whose previous order total is less than or equal to 500. So what I'll do next is click save and build up here in the top right. This is going to ask me to give my filtered data extension a name. So essentially what you're doing here is creating a whole new data extension, a whole new list. So we'll call this one DA list import filtered. We can give it a description if we want, external key, similar to how we just did with the original data extension, and then we can click save and it's going to create that data extension for us. All right, so now that I gave that a second to load in, you can see on the properties page that you have all of the information. You can see here in this type section on the properties list, you can see that it is a filtered data extension, and you can see that sourced DE. So that's the original DE that we created, is that list import data extension with our original data that we uploaded. And then we can see all of our filter criteria here. And you do have the ability here where you can edit and update. So if I were to go, you know what, that isn't exactly what I meant to do, you can come in here, edit your filter, and then click save and refresh, and it will rebuild your list based on the updates that you've made. And then over here you can see that ultimately this pulled in 10 records based on the criteria that we defined. So you can come in here and look and see all of the records that we pulled in here. So hope this is informative and helpful as you guys are creating data extensions and filtered data extensions off of those lists.
Let's review our top takeaways. We learned everything about data extension creation. We learned about naming them, about external keys, when to check if a data extension should be set as sendable and or testable. We went over the data retention policy and also about creating fields, setting primary keys, and defining the send relationship. We then learned about the import. We talked about the file type supported, import types, and the additional options we have at the time of import. Also about mapping the data extension fields against those on the import file. Finally, we created a filter of a data extension and learned how to define those rules. Thanks for joining. For more quick tips, like our channel below.